Thank you so much, Amrita. That was a very generous introduction. And thank you so much, Mr. Farooq, for also coordinating this particular session. And I'm very grateful to Kaki Labs for giving me this platform to interact with all of you. Am I audible? Am I?
Yes, very much, yes.
Okay. So when Amrita spoke to me and she asked me about, some of the talks that we could actually, work on. So in the various topics that we were discussing, finally, I think what really clicked was the position of women in Buddhism. And it's also maybe around March, the Women's Day. And I think, all of those factors played a predominant role. And here I am to actually, give you a short kind of a run through, because 45 minutes is truly a very short time to discuss a topic which is very complex. And especially as all of us know, anytime that you speak about women are exceedingly complex, right? So as far as Indian history and culture goes, we basically study the constructs actually happen based on our literary as well as archaeological sources. Now, I'm a researcher, a professor from the field of ancient India. So when we're looking at ancient Indian history, the time period that we go back is to about 4,500 BCE. And so that basically looks at archaeological as well as literary sources. And when we're looking at archaeological sources, the earliest references that we have is on the sites of Harappa. And after which we come to the Vedic period. And when we're looking at the Vedic period, again, the sources that we have is largely literary sources. And it is common knowledge that when we're speaking about Vedic period, we are looking at the 4 Vedas, which is the Rig, Sama, Atharva, as well as the Yajur Veda. Now, the Veda itself comes from the Sanskrit word vid, which means knowledge. And it is a compendium of various verses, which we call as richas, divided into various mandalas. And the Veda itself is a very important source for us to construct the socio-economic political conditions of India at that particular point in time. Now, along with the Vedas, we also have literary sources like the Vedangas, we have the Upavedas, we have Puranas. All of that gives us a very rich history about the condition of people at that particular point in time. And the sources very clearly tell us that the position of women, as far as the Vedic period went, was very, very good. She was given various platforms. She could continue with her education. And in that context, she was also given a title called Brahmavadini or Sadhyodbhavas. At the same time, we also have, various sources that tell us about the kind of marriages that she had. In fact, there are references that we get to the not just one, but there were 8 forms of marriage. After the Vedic period, we come to about the next phase that we study is the epic age, and epic is the Itihasa, the Ramayana, as well as the Mahabharata. And after the Ramayana and Mahabharata, after the epic age, we come to the phase that we are going to be dealing with right now, which is the phase of the Nastika schools, which is both Buddhism as well as Jainism. So the time period that we have, that we are constructing our historical narratives, is based on literary sources for a particular period of time. And by the time we come to Buddhism and Jainism, we also have archaeological sources that actually support us. During the time of Buddha himself, we have references to various Pitaka literature, which we will study, or which we'll go through right now. And of course, I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. But when we are deliberating on a topic like this, women in Buddhism, we have to basically look at the literature that was available, the literature that plays such an important role, and the literature that is largely divided into 3 segments, which is called as the Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, as well as the Abhidhamma Pitaka. So the sources as such tell us very clearly as to how this particular topic could be navigated. And this is exactly what I'm planning to do. I've kind of divided my session into these subheadings. The first subheading would be society and women, where I discuss a few points as to what are the various references that we get as to how women existed during that particular period. And then we have what is called as a very beautiful text called Terigata, which actually has various expressions of the bhikkhunis coming from different parts of life, different spaces. Their experiences are all documented there. Then we have a very interesting text called Vimanavattu, which I will speak about briefly. Then we have the Jataka literature. Now, Jataka is something that most of us are aware, because stories from the Jatakas are actually part of even our basic school curriculum. And of course, the great Amar Chitra Katha comics have made it so popular. And the Jataka stories kind of endears to people from all walks of life and to all ages. And then, of course, we have this very poignant kind of setup, which is the Sangha. And in this context, we are talking about the Bhikkhuni Sangha. Now, you must be wondering, friends, that when we are speaking about Buddhism, why is it that I started off my session or my lecture talking about the Vedas? Because the point I'd like to make is, when we are studying this process of Indian history, especially ancient India, we have to understand that the sources are all kind of interrelated, and we have to study the sources in the context of that particular period. Here, when we're speaking about Buddha, we are looking at a time period of about 6 BCE. And during 6 BCE, this is the area that we are going to be, that is largely in focus. Now, this area or this particular period is what we call as the Mahajanapada period. The Mahajanapadas were also given another title called the Ganasanghas. Now, in the Ganasanghas, very popularly, it was called as the republics. Now, why was it called as republics? Because republican setup basically implied that people met up to actually elect their leaders. So the Ganasangha, the Mahajanapada, the different names are given. It's either called as Mahajanapadas or it's called as Ganasanghas, popularly known as the republics of ancient India. This is the area that we are actually talking about. So Buddha, since our lecture is largely related to Buddhism and Buddha's space, especially since we're studying about women in the Buddhist literature, basically Buddha came from this area that we know as the Shakya Gana. Now, the Sakyas were a very popular kind of a tribe, and they played a very important role during the time of the entire republican setup. Now, in this particular map, we also see places like Kosala, Mallas, Magadha, Anga, Vriji, Patliputra. All of these places have a very strong presence in the Buddhist literature. We see Gautama Buddha visiting and going and meeting the kings of these Ganasanghas, interacting with them and also teaching them the basic philosophy and the ethics and the teachings of Buddha. That is, he actually spoke about the philosophy of dukkha, which I will speak to you very briefly to these particular kings. Now, again, how is it that we know about these places and these sources? And for that, we actually have what is called as the Tripitakas or the Tipitakas. Now, this is part of what we call as the Pali canon. Now, most of these texts are written in the language Pali. Pali is a simplified form of Sanskrit, and Pali becomes the language that Buddha actually interacted with. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Buddhism also became so popular with the masses, because Buddha's teachings itself was very, very simple, and he spoke to the common man in a language that they could understand, which was Pali. And all these speeches and all his addresses that he gave was preserved in the Tripitaka text. Now, just to give you a basic understanding of what this was, if you're looking at the Tripitaka, we have what is called as the Vinaya Pitaka. Now, in this Vinaya Pitaka, it contains rules and regulations regarding the conduct and the discipline of the monks, as well as that is both the bhikkhunis and the bhikkhunis. Bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis. The bhikkhunis are the nuns. So in the Vinaya Pitaka, we have both. We have the references that are given to both the Bhikkhu Sangha as well as the Bhikkhuni Sangha. I will speak about that very briefly towards the end of my lecture. Then we have what is called as a Sutta Pitaka. Now, Sutta Pitaka is a storehouse. It's totally a storehouse of texts of what we call as the 5 Nikayas. And these 5 Nikayas is a treasure trove, which has various chapters These Nikayas have chapters which is called suttas. And these suttas are totally a treasure trove for us to understand the social, political, economic conditions of Buddha at that particular point in time. And these suttas, most of the time, sometimes it's like a recitation or it's a dialogue. Sometimes it is a lecture that is given by Buddha himself. We find various ways by which the philosophy of Buddha actually came across. Then we have what is called as the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is actually a very deep philosophical, metaphysical aspect of Buddhist philosophy that is actually enshrined in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. So the Tipitaka text becomes a source for us to construct the period of Buddha, to say what Gautama Buddha, or the Tathagat, as he is very popularly known, actually, what was it that he spoke? What was his philosophy? What were his teachings? Is all documented in these particular texts. Now, the best part of the whole story is in the texts that we have, in the various texts that we have, we see that in all those places, Buddha at no point in time actually criticized the existing philosophy that was already there in India at that particular point in time. Now, by the time we come to Buddha, by the time we come to the period of 6 BC of Gautama Buddha, we have to understand, friends, that there was already a very strong tradition that was there, a deep philosophical tradition that was already existing in this country, which was given by the Upanishadic philosophy. We all know about the 10 very famous Upanishads. But what really happened was the Upanishadic philosophy was so highly complex, the entire philosophy was so highly metaphysical that it was not understood by the common man. So what Buddha did, Buddha basically simplified that particular philosophy and he gave it to the common man in a way that he understood. Now, what is it that he was trying to get across? He was basically trying to get across this very interesting point, which is so relevant to all of us today, that is how to annihilate dukkha. Dukkha basically meant dissatisfaction. So in these various texts that you see, that the suttas, the Vinaya texts, the Pitaka texts, etc., all the time we are actually finding various ways by which Buddha was interacting with the common man, coming from different walks of life, teaching him, teaching her, teaching the entire society as to how is it you could annihilate dukkha. In this discourse, in this vast bouquet, if I may say so, of various references that we get, we see how Buddha also interacted with women. So when we are studying about women in Buddhism, my dear friends, these are the references that we actually look at, and most of these references are are first-hand, and also we have what is called as various commentaries, various attakatas, which again we refer to kind of justify or to go back and to ratify what has been said in the Tipitaka text. So here on my slide, you see what is called as the Vinaya Pitaka. The Vinaya Pitaka has these various subtexts. I don't want to go into that too much in detail. And in these subtexts, we have the bhikkhunis, the role of the bhikkhunis, which I will come in my last few slides. Then we have the Sutta Pitaka, very important. It talks about the socio-economic political life. And it's almost, as I said, like, for example, there are suttas in the Sutta Pitaka as a part of the Dikha Nikaya literature. Dikha Nikaya is a subtext of the Sutta Pitaka, where there is this one particular sutta, which is called as the Ajnana Sutta. In the Ajnana Sutta, my friends, we find how the polity of the state was actually maintained. So when today in the space of politics, when we are talking about welfare state, when we are talking about how, the need that every individual in the society or the state has to have a good lifestyle, there should be equality in the society, etc. We can go back to this Ajnana Sutta. In the Ajnana Sutta, we notice very beautifully as to how the people actually give up their rights to one individual. And my dear friends, this one individual was given the title called Mahasammata. Why Mahasammata? Because he was there because of popular choice. So Ajnana Sutta speaks about what is called as the welfare state. Another very interesting sutta here is called the Mahasuddhasana Sutta, where Mahasuddhasana Sutta also we talk about how this king, actually it's a very interesting, I'd like to spend maybe just a minute talking to you about this. Buddha has his parinirvana in this beautiful place called Kusinara. But by the time Kusinara was in a very dilapidated state. So in fact, Ananda, who's a very close disciple of Buddha, actually tells him, why is it that you're choosing this particular village? The city is completely worn down. So at that time, Buddha actually tells him, the reason why I'm choosing this particular place is because I'd like to go back and I'd like to focus on this one particular king called Mahasuddhasana, who used to rule this place. And why Mahasuddhasana? Because he established what was called as a welfare state. And all those details have been documented in this particular sutta. So, and of course, one of the most important suttas that we get here is Mahaparinivana Sutta. And in this particular talk that we are having today, this Mahaparinivana Sutta is so very important, my dear friends, because this is where this great courtesan, this beautiful courtesan, Amarapali, is there. And of course, I'll speak to you more about Amarapali as this lecture proceeds. So, we have the Sutta Pitaka, and for example, just to give you an idea, this Khuddaka Nikaya, which is one of the Nikayas, has 15 subtexts. And in these 15 subtexts, some of the very famous subtexts like Dhammapada, Jataka, etc., is a part of this particular subtext. So one subtext that we will be studying, or we will be touching on very briefly, just to give you a glimpse, is this particular subtext called Therigata, which is what I told you. These are expressions of various nuns, of the bhikkhunis who've joined the Sangha. And when you read it, which I will try in the short period that we have, I'll try and maybe focus on some of those conversations so that you get an idea. And of course, Vimanavattu, all of that is part of the subtext of a Khuddaka Nikaya, which is a part of the Sutta Pitaka. So you can well imagine, my friends, the sources that are there to document all of this. These are again subtexts of the Sutta Pitaka. And of course, we have Abhidhamma, which speaks about philosophy, which deals about metaphysics. And this again is divided into these 7 subtexts that are there. In fact, there are lots of scholars who actually study the interrelationship of psychology, in Buddhist texts. And there, the Abhidhamma text plays a very important role. Now, the question that you'd like to maybe ask me is, ma'am, you're saying all of this, but how is it that this knowledge was actually preserved? Now, that is a very important question for us, and especially for those of us who study ancient India. It is a very tricky question, because most of our literary sources for many centuries went on from what was called as rote learning. In fact, the Vedas itself for very many years passed on from one generation to another, and that is why the Veda itself was given another name called Shruti, because it was passed on in a musical note. And all of us know that Shruti also means a musical note. It comes from Nad, Shruti, from Shruti are swaras. So the tradition that went on was very, very strong, because this is a point that all of us should note, is our education system then was exceedingly good. So the entire charana system that existed, the kind of the significance or the synergy, if I may use that word, between the guru and the Sishya was exceedingly strong. The Sishya himself was given a title called Acharya Kulavasin. So the tradition of education, the tradition of passing on that particular knowledge from one generation to another was already existing. So the Bhanaka tradition here kind of was also influenced by the very strong educational background, or the educational kind of an input that we see during that time, that these Bhanakas used to recite the lectures of Gautama Buddha. So the learning used to happen, and they used to keep reciting it. And so a lot of these recitations, a lot of these, the way it was recitated, etc., has been documented in some of the suttas itself. The method, the way, the manner, the syntaxes, all of that, the grammar, all of that has been documented. So from one space to another, it kind of, that tradition was totally preserved. This is just a chart for us to know the expanse of literature that existed during this particular time. And now another very important point is, now we have the Bhanaka tradition that kind of kept the knowledge alive. But at the same time, my dear friends, the 4 Buddhist councils kind of helped so much to kind of keep this tradition going. The first Buddhist council was held in Rajagriha, and this particular Buddhist council was under the king Ajatashatru. And here we notice that a lot of the bhikkhus at that particular time came together to recite the canons of Dhammas and Vinayas. And most of these, the writings, that the recitation that was there was also kind of written down. So the Buddhist councils was like a place where the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis met, they recited, they made the teachings of Buddha, they maybe kind of revised, the various teachings of Buddha. And these Buddhist councils actually kept the knowledge of Gautama Buddha and what he taught very much very much relevant. And of course, we have the very important third Buddhist council that was under Ashoka at Patliputra. Now, one thing about Ashoka, which actually which was a big help for us, is Ashoka put down a lot of the teachings of Gautama Buddha as pillar as well as rock edicts. Now, for us, that is a very important source. Now, these pillar and rock edicts actually speaks about the teachings of Buddha and how Ashoka, as a follower of Tathagat, as a follower of Buddha, he himself, talked about those teachings and he maintained it. He actually preserved all of that through the pillar as well as the rock edicts. So for us, what really happens is, on one side, we have the literary sources, we have the entire Tipitaka traditions, we have the Bhanaka tradition that has maintained the suttas in the way and the manner it is, and that gets thoroughly, justified, that thoroughly gets more ratified with the sources, with the pillar as well as rock edicts of Ashoka. So that way, we kind of seem to be getting an entire picture. And of course, the 4th Buddhist council was under Kanishka, and this particular council was very important, my dear friends, because this was the time when the entire Buddhism got divided into the Hinayana as well as Mahayana. Again, I'm not going to go into it too much in detail, but this is important for us because during the time of Kanishka, there was this beautiful writer, poet by the name of Ashwagosha. Now, Ashwagosha, we will talk about Ashwagosha because he's written this beautiful play, which is called as Buddha Charita. And it is in Buddha Charita we actually come to realize the importance of Yashodhara. More to that when I come to that particular point. So the 4 principles. So now what is it that I have been trying to do? Basically, I'm trying to tell you that when we are studying the position of women, or when we are studying a social setup, a political setup in our country during this particular phase, the sources that we have, the sources that are there to study are exceedingly vast, and these sources, my dear friends, are very well preserved. So when we are basing our opinions, it is based on the very strong primary sources and also the commentaries that are available all over the world, right? So when we look at Buddha, what is it? So when we are looking at the entire space of women, the point that you need to realize or notice, in the Gana Sanghas, in the Mahajanapadas, which I told you, there were 16 Mahajanapadas, we realized that it was a very, very prosperous time. We have, in fact, references to Magadha, where Ajatashatru was one of the very famous kings there. And Ajatashatru actually created 2 very important weapons called Mahashilakantaka and Rathamusala, with which he went to fight. At the same time, we also see the warfare that used to be happening between the Ganas. So the life that you see in the Gana Sanghas in the period that we are studying was economically very, very vibrant. Another very important point that you should keep in mind is during this time, there was also what we call as the Sethis. The Sethis were actually merchants. And these merchants were the head of various trade guilds. These trade guilds, my dear friends, were called as Shrenis. So the economic history that we study here was very, very vibrant. And by the time you come to 3rd century BCE, that is by the time we come to Ashoka, And by the time we come to the Mauryan period, Chandragupta Maurya, we have a very erudite scholar, a great writer like Kautilya, who's created this beautiful book, has written this book on Artha Shastra. So the concept of Artha, the concept of economy was very much vibrant and very much alive in Indian society. And again, just to take this point a little bit more further, as far as the Indian society went, we had something which is called as the Purushartha, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And the best part, my dear friends, is Buddha never kind of, he never demeaned all of that. In fact, there is a sutta called Brahmajala Sutta that we study. And in the Brahmajala Sutta, we actually get references to the various luxurious items and articles that people used to use at that particular point in time. And we also, of course, have the Sanchi, Bharat Stupa, etc., that has beautiful renditions of the economic life that existed. Now, why am I talking to you about economics when we are looking at this? The point is, Buddha spoke about dukkha. Dukkha basically meant dissatisfaction. Obviously, there must have been so much of material prosperity. That's why, there was this whole concept of dissatisfaction, dukkha. Now, the second that he spoke about was dukkha samudaya. Dukkha samudaya basically meant what? What was the cause of this dissatisfaction? Why is it? What was the cause? What is it that created this kind of dissatisfaction? And the theory there was, he spoke about the theory which is called Paticca Samutpada, the sense-object contact and sense-object craving. Then Buddha says there is a way out, dukkha nirodha. And the last is dukkha nirodha marga, dukkha nirodha magga, which is also called as the eightfold path or Majjhima Patipada. So, my dear friends, when we are speaking about women and Buddhism, the point that all of us should note is all these teachings of Buddha, whether it was the Chattaryarya Satchani, whether it was the Brahma Viharas, whether it was the Dasaparamitas, women were not kept out of it. And we will see why and how slowly as we keep developing this particular lecture. So Buddha belonged to this particular Shakya Gana. So we have that very interesting episode where he sees 4 sites and then he decides, okay, that we'll keep that the way it is. But here, what is important is, here we see an individual who wanted to make a difference to the society. He saw that people were dissatisfied and he wanted to find a way out which is not, totally in the element of yagna and rituals and sacrifices, or highly metaphysical, which was very, very abstract, which we see in the Upanishads. It's a great philosophy. The Upanishadic philosophy, especially we're looking at the kosha theory, etc., is very, very interesting. But the point is, for a common man, how do you basically give that kind of happiness to the common man, which is exactly what Buddha was trying to do. Now, dukkha samudaya, dukkha nirodha, and dukkha nirodha magga, which is centric to Buddha's teachings, which is the Chattaryarya Satchani, became the norm of the society. And because of his simplicity, because of the fact that he approached people on one-to-one, he was like a magnet, attracting people coming from all walks of life. But there is a catch here. When Buddha went on to teach, when Buddha started getting into the society to teach, at that particular point in time, he was not really focused. His mindset was not there about accepting women. We don't see those references. We don't get those references till the coming in of his foster mother called Mahapajapati Gautami. So before we go to Mahapajapati Gautami, let's talk a little bit about some of these ladies that are very, very famous, even in our Buddhist sources. And you, as interested people, would have, come across such names. So one name that comes across very commonly in most of our Buddhist sources is this lady called Maya Devi. Now, Maya Devi was the daughter of Mahasuppa, and he was basically from this particular place called Devada Nagara. Now, she was the youngest in the family and she was married to Suddhodana, who was the king of Kapilavatu. She was a pious lady, and after the 7th day after the birth of Gautama's birth, she passed on. She passed away. And Lalita Vistara, now we have other sources. Now there are other Buddhist texts that talks about Maya Devi. And of course, the birth of Maya Devi, the birth of Buddha has been beautifully recounted in the books like Buddha Charita of Ashwagosha, Lalita Vistara, etc. Now, Maya Devi's temple, where the Buddha was born, is beautifully maintained today in Nepal, in Lumbini. So when you go to Lumbini in Nepal, you will see that that entire park is done so beautifully. It's created so nicely, and in that Lumbini park is Maya Devi's temple, and there you will see the marker stone, the exact area where Buddha was born. It's a beautiful place, and if you're traveling to that part of the world, please do go and see this particular place. It's very, very nice. In fact, what is so fascinating is Buddhism is a philosophy that has spread all over the world. So every country where Buddhism is famous and Buddhism is a state religion, that country has established its Sangha, its Vihara there, based on their states and their country's architecture. It's very beautiful. You should go and see there. So that's about Maya Devi. Now, when we're looking at Mahapajapati Gautami is there in the text for a long time. Mahapajapati Gautami was a lady who actually requested Buddha to take the woman into the Buddhist Sangha. Now, Buddha was not very keen, but then the story or the episode that has been captured in the Nikaya literature and the Tipitaka literature is that she walks with 500 ladies from Patliputra to Vaishali, and she actually sits outside the Sangha where Buddha is sitting, where Buddha is staying, and she says, you have to take us in. You have to, take all of us, and we should become the part of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. We should be a part of the Sangha. Now, Buddha was very reluctant. At that time, Ananda, who's his very favorite disciple, in fact, Ananda is with Buddha in his last, during his last few hours. It was Ananda who actually tells Buddha that, he should actually take the Bhikkhunis into the Sangha. So, Mahapajapati Gautami is so very important because she also leads after that a very spiritual kind of a life. Now, further, in the Therigata, in that particular text, which I told you, which talks about the various episodes of the Bhikkhunis, she seemed to be giving a lot of advice to the Bhikkhunis. And she also has, through her meditation, etc., she also reaches very great heights in her self-actualization process. So we notice that in the textual references that we get, especially in another very interesting text called Manoratha Purani, which actually has a commentary on a lot of the text that deals with the position of women, gives a very high, a stance to this Mahapajapati Gautami, who was the foster mother of Gautama Buddha. Then we have a very interesting person, very, very interesting person is Yashodhara. Now, Yashodhara was the daughter of King Dandapani, who was the wife of Prince Siddhartha. She is considered to be a woman of a very strong will. Now, of course, what really happens is we all know that story where Buddha actually leaves, Yashodhara and their son Rahula sleeping, and he walks away into the night with Kantaka and Channa, and basically just to go and find out, this cause of dukkha. How do you basically create a philosophy which will rejuvenate the people of the land? So Yashodhara's references that we get in the Pitaka literature, we realize that Yashodhara is a very quiet, a very demure, a very stately kind of a person. And we also realize that we don't find too many references to her at all, excepting in one particular place where she, in the Dhammapada Attakatha, we find this reference that she sends her son Rahula to Buddha demanding inheritance from Buddha. At that time, Buddha actually says, since when the son is asking for inheritance, Buddha says, yes, you're going to get the inheritance, and the inheritance is you will also become a monk. So the Pavija ceremony happens to Rahula. So the element that we see of Yashodhara, especially if I have to quote some very senior scholars who worked in movement in Buddhism, that is Dr. Meena Talim. She very beautifully says that she suffers in silence. That's Dr. Talim's view. And I totally would agree with that, because there are not too many references that we get about Yashodhara and what really happens to her till we come to Ashwagosha's work on Buddha Gosha. Now, Buddha Charita, when he's written this particular book of Buddha Charita, Ashwagosha, who is actually a dramatist, and he was in the court of Kanishka, speaks about Yashodhara very, very explicitly. She talked. It's almost like it's like a play that you can actually stage, where he speaks about Yashodhara's angst, Yashodhara's anger. I won't have time to read the paragraphs, but basically she is, all her emotions, all her, the fact that she was wrong, then all of that comes out very beautifully in the book Buddha Charita, written by Ashwagosha. So it's very interesting that, sometimes it does happen that I've asked this question so many times in class when I'm teaching my students that, ma'am, but what about Yashodhara? I said, yeah, that's a fact. As a woman and what he really did. But then when I speak to scholars, especially to my own teacher and my own guide, Dr. Talim, when I spoke to her, she says, but Radha, look at what Buddha actually has done to the society at large. So somewhere, these conflicts are a little difficult to navigate. But the fact of the case is, yes, in this particular text or play that we see Yashodhara's angst coming out very, very brilliantly and very beautifully. At the same time, when Buddha actually comes to a couple of us to Yashodhara, says she's not going to come and meet him. So at that time, it is Buddha who goes to meet her, and she then, takes, because she looks at the towering, which it's a beautiful painting that is there in Ajanta, which I will definitely show you. Cave number 17, and there she stands in front of Buddha asking, what is the wrong that I did? Very beautifully done. So Yashodhara, yes, it is what it is, and we'll have to deal with the various other references that we keep getting about this very strong but a very stoic woman. So here we have another reference where we have this reference to Kissa Gautami. Now, Buddhist literature is very interesting. So across the various literary sources and the commentaries, there are these episodes that are captured. And in fact, there is a reference where Kissa Gautami was actually a lady, in Kapilavastu. She actually falls in love with Buddha, and Buddha actually goes, he does not really reciprocate, because by the time Buddha was already in that stage where he had only become a bhikkhu. So we get these references because the personality of Buddha was so strong, and it was so magnetic that, in fact, we have these references. There is this Kosala Suttas where Pasanedi, who is the king of Kosala, actually asks Buddha, how is it that you're a bhikkhu, that, when you're speaking, there are lakhs of students and lakhs of listeners sitting in front of you, and nobody is even coughing. But here I'm a king. I have everything going for me, but I'm not able to maintain order in my own sabha. So we get these references, across the various suttas that we study. Another very interesting person that we see is another lady that most of us in our Buddhist sources we would have come across, which is called Sujata. And Sujata is a lady who actually gives this nutritive milk, which is paisa, she goes to give this paisam to the tree god, which is Nigrodha tree. But there she sees Buddha and she gives the paisam to Buddha. He takes that, and after that, she becomes a life giver, because Buddha then gets the strength, because he was fasting, was going through that entire hatha yoga, and then he takes the paisam, and after that he goes on to his meditation, and then of course Buddha attains what we call as this entire understanding of the entire Chattari Arya Satchari. So that's a very interesting. So Sujata also plays a very important role. Now, in the lay devotees, we have this very interesting lady by the name of Vishaka Megara Mata. Absolutely a wonderful woman. Now lay devotees, my dear friends, were called as Upasikas. And these Upasikas had this whole space where they could go and work in the Buddhist Sangha for about 15 days. And they could come from any walks of life. So so lay devotees in the Pali text, we find them as the Upasikas. Upasakas and Upasikas, right? So Vishaka Megara Mata was very interesting. Why? Because there's a whole altercation that happens. I do not want to get into those details, but then she's asked to leave her house. Her father-in-law asks her to leave, but she refuses. She says, I'm not going to leave. So at that time, there's a council that she says, I want to go and explain my point of view. You can't just leave, you can't just ask me to leave my house. So there is a council of other members who come, and she puts her case across, and then of course she says, no, I am not leaving, and everyone is kind of convinced. So there's a little bit of that backdrop story that we get of Vishaka Maigara Mata, showing that she's a very powerful woman who stood her ground. So that's very important. And then we also realize that in Vishaka Maigara Mata, she contributes a lot to the Buddhist Sangha. And she basically supports the Buddhist Sangha by giving them alms, by giving them food, by giving, various kinds of things to eat, etc., for bhikkhus, etc., who are embarking on their journey. She nurtures the sick monks, she gives medicines, a lot of things. At the same time, she also helps the bhikkhunis. She helps the bhikkhunis by supporting them, by giving them clothes, etc. So Vishaka Maigara Mata is very important. Why? Because she is like a very strong woman who is supporting the Sangha. Some very interesting references also that we get where sometimes when there are these conflicts in the Buddhist Sangha, where there is a lady who's not knowing that she was pregnant, joined the Sangha, Vishaka Maigara Mata steps in to say that no, she was not, she doesn't know, so please forgive her. So lot of references that we get about Vishaka Maigara Mata, who actually, helps the Sangha at so many levels in a very definitive kind of way. Then we also have another lady called Suppaya Upasika, who is very great in giving medicines. She supplies a lot of medicines to the Bhikkhuni and the Bhikkhu Sangha. Another lady by the name of Suppaya Koliya Datta, which actually also gives food. Then we also have this other lady called Dhammadina, because she was a great philosopher, and Buddha himself calls her as Pandita. Then we have this lady called Sumedha, and she was a great orator. And as an orator, she is called as Bahusutta and Buddha Shashana Vahita. That is, she was also able to speak about Buddha and Buddha's teachings very, very greatly. So she was a great orator. She could speak about Buddha's teachings, etc. And all of them were upasikas. We also have this other lady called Subatheri, who was considered, she was a very beautiful lady, but she used to go deep into the jungles for meditation. So my dear friends, when we are looking at the sources as such, the source study that we do, we find references to a lot of these ladies who came from different walks of life, who contributed as upasikas to the Buddhist Sangha. And these are some names, some references that I thought I could share with you. At the same time, we also have references to ladies who continued with their education, just like the Brahmavadinis, the whole element of ladies who decided not to get married but to keep studying. We have those references also in the Buddhist literature. And they were given titles called Medhavini and Smriti Mata, Shrutidhara. Such names were given to these ladies who continued with their education. Some of those ladies, just to give you some ideas, are by the name of Soma, Sumana, and in these literature, both in the Pali literary texts as well as in the commentaries that we have, there is also references about their background, about their families. So we realize that it was a very bustling and a very vibrant society. At the same time, my dear friends, we also have references to different types of wives. And in the Anguttara Nikaya, we have some references where a wife who was a destroyer was called as Vadaka, a wife who was a robber was called as Chori, was a mistress was a Aita, a motherly, a wife was very motherly, Mata, a sisterly type, Bhagini, a companion, Sakhi, a slave or a Dasi type who was always very meek, and Fable was also called as a Dasi kind of a wife. So we have these references that we get about wives, about ladies who continued with their education. And then we also have ladies of how they also contributed to the Sangha, where we see provides water. She was called as Oda Patnika, who receives clothes, Patavasini, lady who carries the entire element of cleaning the Sangha, etc. is also, we find those references that we get here. So we notice that in the sources that we have, it gives us this entire bit of ladies going through what we call as dana, shila, bhavana, reverence, which is apachanaya, service, all of that. We notice that they participated in the entire space of the Gana Sanghas and also in the space of the Buddhist period that we see. At the same time, also interacting with Buddha, participating in the various teachings that Buddha actually did. So some of the references that we get in the sources, especially in the general sources, we find all of this. And we also have references to the specific sources that we study, which is the Theriyagata. Now, the Theriyagata, my dear friends, is a classic text, which I have actually surmised what is the Theriyagata, what are the various things that the inferences that we could get from this text of Theriyagata. Now, the Theriyagata as a text belongs to the Khuddaka Nikaya of the Sutta Pitaka. And the Theriyagata itself has about 524 verses and captures the gathas of 73 nuns. And they reflect that they come from different backgrounds. The kind of references that you get here is simply spectacular. They come from all walks of life. Their verses capture the varied expressions of our innate feelings that reflect the challenges that women seekers had to go through in their self-actualization process. These expressions are in the form of poems, dialogues, as well as conversations. Now, just to put this into perspective, Theriyagata are for the bhikkhunis, right? So right now, some of the references that I gave you are of ladies who are not bhikkhunis. They were not part of the Buddhist Sangha, but they participated in a lot of activities of the Sangha. They participated in getting the points across. In fact, we have these references, where Buddha is walking and suddenly he would find this particular hill or this area where he would want to deliver a lecture. So suddenly there would be people, the Gahapatis and the Gahapatins would come. The one would come with the fan, one would come with a lamp, one would come with the water. So basically setting that entire stage up, which is so beautiful, right? Today, when you want to organize a lecture or whatever, there's just so much that all of us have to go through, right? From booking the hall to, the other logistic nightmare that most of us go through. But then when they wanted to have a lecture, Buddha would just start off and all of them participated. And here we notice the role of women, both as Gahapatins, that is as women householders, and as well as Upasikas, playing a very important role. Theriyagata speaks about the angst of women, who actually join the Sangha. And what is it that they go through? What is it that they went through? What are the various challenges that they went through is there? And they are also in the Theriyagata, we also find the various aware of the bodily cravings. So very clearly showing or very clearly saying that when Buddha talks about paticca samutpada, which is sense object contact, sense object craving, the whole concept of dukkha, it was same. So there was not gender difference out here. What men went through, the woman also went through. Right. So there was that expressions that are there. And we also find expressions in the Theriyagata where she actually speaks about her cravings and, all her feelings and her emotions. And then she says, no, this is not what I want. I'd like to cut off these emotions. I'd like to cut off these cravings because I found that kind of bliss in the Dhamma. I found that bliss in the feet of Tathagat. So we find those references. We also have references where some of these ladies have actually listened to Buddha firsthand, and listen to his teachings firsthand, and he has delivered those teachings to them. So they're very, and also the point that I put down here is from the Theriyagata also we find these very expressive about the fact that they lived in the lap of luxury before they joined the Theriyagata. Another very important point, my dear friends, is young bhikkhunis were initiated by senior bhikkhunis. We find those references too, where some very senior bhikkhunis were able to teach, the junior, the bhikkhunis who've just joined the Sangha. So the knowledge process that happened very, very systematically. It was not that just because she happened to be a woman, she was not entitled to teach. She could actually teach and initiate the young, ladies who joined the Sangha. In some cases, we also have some cases where the ladies joined the Sangha because they wanted to be freed from the monotonous household chores and bad marriages. And also, some bhikkhunis were initiated by Buddha himself. So I won't have too much time to go through. In fact, Terigata itself can be 2-hour session. But just to give you some points here, we find these references by some of the ladies like Sumana Terigata, having seen the elements of suffering, do not come to birth again, having fully removed desire for becoming, calmed you will dwell. So it's in a very poetic way. These verses are referred in that way. Another very interesting reference that we get in the chapter 2, which is called as the Khuddaka Nikaya, this lady by the name of Addha Kashi. Her name is Addha Kashi because half Kashi, because she actually says, in the Republic of Kashi, my toll was so much, having town rated me like that, established me as half the rate of the country's daily income, saying that she was a courtesan, and she was so she was so much wanted that half the rate of Kashi was, that was the rate that she was charging. But then, she decides, no, I'm willing to write away all of that at the Kashi because I found solace with Buddha and I found solace in Buddha's teachings. We also have cases where there is a lady who's lost her son, lost her children. So she's totally, lost, and she finds solace in the Bhikkhuni Sangha. Another very interesting source that we get in the Terigata is showing the trinkets, displaying the hidden body parts. I did various illusions, enchanting many people. But having adorned this body nicely, a topic of prattling for fools, I stood at the doors of courtesan house like a hunter trying to amuse. Intoxicated with color and beauty, with fortune and fame too, inebriated with, I was despising others. So we have references. Now, this is a quote from Vimala Terigata, where she is actually she's enticing people. So obviously she was also a courtesan, but then finally she decides that she does not want to deal with that kind of life, and she she gives up and she joins the Sangha. Another very interesting thing is this Vasati Terigata, where distressed with sorrow over a son, I was deranged and senseless, naked and uncomfortable, and I walked here and there. Living on garbage heap and resting on cemetery too, I dwelt for 3 years, fully given to hunger and thirst. Then I saw well gone, one near the city of Mithila, tamer of the untamed one, self-enlightened and fearless. Having regained the presence of mind, having paid homage, I sat down. He preached Dhamma to me, Gautama, with compassion. So again, we find that how ladies were totally distressed, were totally lost, found that compassion there. So in Sujata Terigata, Kema Teri, we have a lot of those references where ladies have come from such well-to-do lives, etc. But then, it all pales when they look at Buddha, because they also wanted to understand. They wanted to come out of the cycle of that. They also wanted to find a way out of this whole theory of causation. Another very important is in the chapter of 40s, where we find the story of Isa Dasi theory. Very, very interesting story, where she is married 3 times. And the story here goes, the references that we get here is that for no rhyme or reason, she's a very diligent wife. And when you read what all that she had to do, it was a classic case of looking after the mother-in-law and the father-in-law and, taking care of their needs and, finishing the houseworks, everything, cooking and cleaning, the classic kind of a template. Isa Dasi did all of that, including holding comb, perfume, coal and mirror, like an attendant. I myself adored my husband. So I myself cooked rice, everything she did. But for some reason, the husband just left her and went. The second time, again, she does. Second time, she gets married again. And again, there's the same problem, the husband. The third time, there is a bhikkhu who actually, there's a young man who actually gets married to her. But for some reason, again, this third person also leaves her. And then she does not know what to do. Then she realizes that this life, is full of misery. She is not, it does not happen. She realizes all of this is fleeting. All of this is anicca. So she decides that she is going to join the Sangha. So we find such references too. But another very important chapter that we find here is this lady called Sumedha Gata. Beautiful, it's the last chapter in the Gata, where again, as scholars actually say, that some of the ladies who joined the Sangha were also innately spiritually inclined. And this is one such Sumedha who was spiritually inclined. And the conversation that she has, she wants to join the Sangha, but her parents do not allow her. And then she kind of, convinces her parents. And then she decides. And then, of course, after that, she joins the Sangha. So the entire chapter, actually, the entire discourse here speaks about her journey to join the Buddhist Sangha. So the Gata, my dear friends, is again references that we get, which is the last point I put. The expressions also document the fact of some women who are innately inclination to walk the path of spirituality. Now, the question that you'll ask me is, how is this kind of different from what is there? Yes, totally, because in the literature that we have, I don't think there's any kind of a literature that actually speaks about expressions, angst, the challenges, the trials, and the tribulations of women. Without any inhibitions. And then also stories. In fact, you will find conversations, between both the bhikkhunis saying, okay, this was your life, but listen, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I crave for. This is the path I want to give back to the society. So that kind of references we get in the Gata. Another very interesting text is, which is called as Vimanavattu. And this particular Vimanavattu, again, I do not want to go too much into detail, but just to highlight some points here is, there is this 15th episode, which is called Uttara's Mansion. Now, my dear friends, the references that we get is so fascinating because there is a transformation of this poor farmer called Punna. Why? Because he did some very good work. There's a whole story there. And so he gives his daughter Uttara to a rich banker's son, to a Sethi. But her husband was a non-believer. And so Uttara feels very caged and she was not allowed to do a single act of merit. So she's very, very frustrated. So she goes and speaks to her father. So her father says, you do one thing, you take the services of a courtesan by the name of Sirima. Now, courtesan, now she was a Ganika. So Sirima says, fine, I would be in your place. And she accepts 1,000 kahapanas for every night. So Uttara is very happy. So she goes, she works in the Sangha for that 15 days and participates very happy. But after that, what happens is Sirima is so happy in the life of a Grasta that she doesn't want to go back and she actually wants to kill Uttara. But then Uttara kind of understands, no, let me not, look at this badly. Why? Because it is thanks to her that I could go to the Sangha, so she forgives her. Now, this is the episode that has been captured in this particular Vimanavattu text. But the point is how liberal that could be. In the sense, in the Vimanavattu, my dear friends, a Vimana basically metaphorically means an aeroplane. So here in the Vimanavattu, in all these Vimanas that we find Deepa Vimana, Nava Vimana, etc. In all these Vimanas, we see ladies. They could be daughters, they could be wives, they could be mothers, whatever, in whatever capacity. They would come and do a small act of charity to Buddha or to Buddha's Buddha's students, and because of which, metaphorically, there would be a Vimana that would take them to the heaven. And in this particular Vimanavattu is what we also find this chapter of Chandali Vimana, where Buddha accepts that water from a Chandalika. So the references that we get in Vimanavattu talks about women coming from different walks of life and different families, and all of them contribute exceedingly to the Sangha and to the Buddha. So here there is a Sirima Vimana. There is a whole story here, where she becomes an ardent follower of Buddha. She starts giving alms, she starts giving charity to the Sangha. And the story goes that, the story that we see is, a lot of people say that, oh, people are actually going there not to take the charity. Of course, they're also getting the charity, but they're also seeing, Srima because she's so beautiful. And apparently there's a monk who falls, he's totally enamored by her beauty and he wishes to see her. But that day she falls sick, and the monk actually notices that she was so beautiful even when she was unwell. Srima meets the monk, but after a few days she passes away. But here, what happens is Buddha takes this as an example of taking her body, placing it in the central area, saying that this is the body that everyone was enamored. But look at what really happens. End of the day, death is an equalizer. And when this body remains without being cremated, it also festers and, it kind of decays. So the whole concept of impermanence, anicca, that is a reference that we get from this quotation, Sirima, which is part of what we study as the Vimanavattu literature. So again, when we're looking at position of woman in Buddhism, the references are multi-dimensional and, they come in various layers. Of course, I'm just giving the basic essence because it won't be possible for me to get into the backstories and the back references that we have. Now comes the all-time, thing of the Mahaparinirvana Sutta. The Mahaparinirvana Sutta, it talks about this beautiful lady by the name of Ambapali. And there's a whole story of Ambapali that we find here, that she was found in the mango grove, Sakya noble, all of that, right? So she was nurtured by Mahanama. Mahanama, who was childless, welcomed the baby and handed her to his wife. The family reared her amid pomp and luxury as his own daughter. She grew up to be a beautiful young lady. Mahanama was worried about her marriage and she was coveted by sons of very wealthy people. Mahanama was in a fix. He decides to put up the proposal in front of the assembly. He calls for a meeting with the members of the Lichavi Gana. Lichavis are very powerful. Wants to choose a proper bride for his adopted daughter. The members decide to take a look at her. They were struck by her beauty. At that time, the members then decide that let her become the property of the state. Let her become what was called as Gana Bhogya. Mahanama could not disobey that decision. But Amarapali then asks for 5 conditions. And what does she say? She says she should be provided with a house in the best locality of the city. Only one person will be entitled to enter into her premises at a time. Further, her fee would be 500 kashapanas every night. A house could be inspected 7th day for an enemy culprits. And the story goes, and when there should be no watch persons, that she should have her privacy. So Ambapali then selected a house in the best locality, and she had the walls and all of that painted with artists, ministers, she had that entire space decorated very beautifully. And then the story goes that she meets Bimbisara, and then both of them have a child by the name of Vimala Kodana. The discourse in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta also. So we have 2 elements that we understand about Ambapali. One is her relationship with Bimbisara. And then she gives birth to a child by the name of Vimala Kondana, and she listens to his lecture, and that's how she transforms. She becomes Bhikkhuni. Another reference that we get is the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, where it is beautifully documented there that Buddha is invited for lunch at the same time by 2 people. One is the Lichavigana, the powerful Lichavigana, and Amarapali. But Buddha decides to go to Amarapali's grove. So that's a very powerful statement that Buddha makes, where he is not really bringing in any kind of a gender divide, because Buddha was that kind of a personality. You see, Buddha's teachings were such that he wanted to get his points across, get his teaching across to the common man, to the common men and women in the society. And so at every point in time, he made those references. This is again some sculptural references that we get. Another story is again from this lady called Vasvadatta, who was a very famous courtesan. And one day she happened to see the bhikkhu called Upagupta. She falls in love with him and sends him a message. But Upagupta replies to her at that time that this was not the right time to meet her. A few months later, Vasvadatta falls in love with a artisan, with the chief of the artisans. But a wealthy merchant comes to Mathura and falls in love with Vasvadatta. So what does Vasvadatta do? Vasvadatta saw the wealth that the merchant possessed, and she decides to kill her previous lover, the artisan. Then she conceals his body under her anthill. The disappearance of the artist caused immense angst. They searched for his body and found it buried under an anthill. Vasudetta was then tried and condemned to have her ears and nose and limbs cut off. She was thrown into a graveyard. But thanks to some old associates of hers, they nursed her and they bring her back to life. It was that time that Upagupta comes to meet her. When Vasudetta sees him, she says, bye. I mean, that was the time when I was all, I was beautiful and I was a courtesan and I was all over. I mean, I had everything going for me with pearls and silks, etc. But now I'm, in this state, but still you come. At that time, Upagupta says, if I would have told you at that time the concept of anicca, which is impermanence, you wouldn't have listened. So he calmly then preaches her the doctrine of Dhamma, and she takes refuge in the Dhamma. So that's one reference that we get. Then we also get references to various courtesans in the Jataka literature. I won't go too much into the Jatakas. Again, Jatakas are part of the Khuddaka Nikaya. They have 547 such stories. And they include, now this is what is important, my dear friends. They include what we call as the Dasaparamitas. And these Dasaparamitas are Dana, Shila, Nekamma, Panya, all of this, patience, truthfulness, determination, all of this. And these Jatakas, these characters, these traits that you see in the Jataka literature was universal. All members of the society could actually take that. So here we have what is called as a Sulasa Jataka. And in the Sulasa Jataka, we have this name by the name of Sulasa. She had 500 courtesans and her own price was about 1,000 pieces a night. A thief by the name of Sattuka was being brought into the city to be hung. The news excited the entire city. Turns out the Sulasa who was standing near the window falls in love with this thief. And the story goes, again, for the want of time, she lives in harmony and she's very happy, but the thief actually has, he's actually looking for an opportunity to kill her and wants to take her wealth. So he tells her that he's promised to make an offering to the tree deity on a mountain top and takes her up. But by the time she realizes that, he's going to kill her, and then Sulasa reminds him that, why is it that you're doing this to me? I mean, I could get 1,000 pieces a day, but I didn't look at that. Why? Because I wanted to get married to you. I could have also got married to a rich man's son, which also again says that Ganikas could get married. But then after which, Sulasa decides that she has to teach him a lesson. So she actually asks him, she says, let me just bow down and, take your blessings. It was more a ploy. So when she's turned, he turns, she just throws him away. She just pushes him down that particular mountain hill. So that's one reference that we get about this lady called Sulasa. Adhana Jataka, again, very interesting. Mahadana, again, just to cut short this story, it so happens that this merchant's son was very attracted to the rich courtesan. He used to give her 1,000 pieces of gold every day. But once he meets her without money, and he promises her that he will give it to her the next time that he meets her. But then she is very clear. She says, listen, I cannot do this because this is the part of my profession. If I would allow you without, then there'll be some more people who will come without that money. So I cannot give you this favor. So it's better that you leave. So he's so upset, Mahadana. He understands the fleetingness of nature. He understands there's a whole episode introspection that he goes through. Then he becomes an ascetic. And the king, gets a little upset because he was a very dear friend. And she lives in a chariot to bring him. She tries to bring, but he preaches the concept of impossible. So that's why it's called Adhana. I will not come back. I am done with this world. I do not want to take this life up again. So he becomes a Bhikkhu Sangha. So in the Bhikkhu Sangha, we find a lot of such stories where what transformed a man, a householder to become a Bhikkhu. So some of the cases, again, we have references there. There are other references to Ganikas called Upalavana and Bindumati. Again, such references that we get here. Then the last bit that I wanted to focus on was the Sangha. Now, see, the Sangha, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, of course, 100%. We have Mahapajapati Gautami who went and spoke to Buddha, and Buddha accepted the Bhikkhunis, the ladies, to become the part of Sangha. But in the Sangha, because Sangha itself is another topic, but I just wanted to focus on what is called as the Attagada Dhamma, which is the 8 chief rules. Now, I'll tell you what it is, and then, maybe in the Q&A, we could take this up a little bit more. A bhikkhuni of even 100 years standing shall make a salutation to the monk. She should rise up in the presence of the monk, go down before the monk, even if he is newly initiated. A bhikkhuni is not to spend any rainy season in the district where there is no monk. Every half a month, a bhikkhuni is to await from the bhikkhu sangha to fix two things: fixing the date of the uposatha ceremony at the time. The bhikkhu would come to give exhaustion. So what is the uposatha? Uposatha ceremony is where you go like a confession. So basically, in this Athagaru, what to surmise what this is, what we understand here is a bhikkhuni had to face both the bhikkhu sangha and the bhikkhuni sangha. Bhikkhu did not have to go through the bhikkhuni sangha. Even if she's an 80-year-old bhikkhuni, she had to stand up and pray, show her obeisance to a young novice, but this vice versa was not there. At the same time, she cannot stay alone, in a particular area, but because she has to be in an area where there are bhikkhus. Now, why is this has come out? Now, there is a story to this too. I mean, there are documented evidences why this has happened because of certain instances. Okay, again, we do not, and all of this, my friends, has been explained in the Vinaya. You remember I started off my session by saying Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma. Now, all of this is there in the Vinaya text. What is it that these rules came? Because the rules happened. Why? Because there was a problem. There was some kind of mishap or whatever. That is why this particular rule came. So the Bhikkhuni Sangha can, at the same time, Bhikkhuni cannot abuse a Bhikkhu. And the official admonition by the Bhikkhunis of the Bhikkhu is forbidden. A Bhikkhuni cannot yell or shout at a bhikkhu. That is totally forbidden. So we realize that, again, I'm quoting Dr. Talim here. Now the point is, why is it that she put herself through this? Now this is at one level slightly problematic. Why is it that these rules should be there for the bhikkhuni? So there I'm just quoting Dr. Talim's view, which says very beautifully that her desire to be a part of the self-actualization process, a desire to be of use to the society and to the members of the society was so much that she decided, okay, this is a small price to pay. It's perfectly fine. I'll go through this because I want to be a part of the larger canvas. I want to be a part of, Buddha's teachings. In this way, I can disassociate myself from the cravings and the attachments and all the misery, that I went through. I would be on the spiritual path of happiness. So this could have been the intention of why she did that. And of course, we have the cave 17, Ajanta, Yashodhara and Rahula, which I told you that here this painting is so evocative, my friends. Here Buddha is standing there tall, with the bowl, and here Yashodhara is the expression on our eyes is, what is it that I did? Why did you have to do this to me? And Rahula also looking at Buddha, for which there are no explanations. But as I told you, Yashodhara's episodes, etc., is captured by Ashwagosha. And with this, I'd like to end my session. And I would hope for questions so that if there is time, Farooqji.
Yes, there is time.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I think questions would really help. Because,
sure.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, first of all, for a great depth in your talk. And it was really enlightening for me, who knew rather little about this fascinating aspect. Let's look at the questions now. The first is, you've sort of answered it, but in case you'd like to add anything more, the questioner is saying that he's read that Yashodhara and Mahaprajapati, his aunt and stepmother, also became bhikkhunis. And is that from where the bhikkhuni sect started?
Yes, 100%. The Yashodharas, that's why I said Mahaprajapati Gautami is when the bhikkhuni sangha really started. No, there is no doubt.
Yes. Yeah.
Yashodhara also becomes a bhikkhuni. See, that's why I said the Pitaka literature, the Tripitaka literature does not speak too much about Yashodhara, excepting for that fact that when he comes, Buddha comes, Anguttara Nikaya, there's some reference where we see that she doesn't go. Apart from that, we don't have references to Yashodhara, but we would like to think from the various Attakatas and the commentaries that Yashodhara also became a bhikkhuni. She also became a bhikkhuni and she led a very stoic life. That's the overall picture that we actually get.
The next question also you partially answered,
sure,
about Buddha resisting for a long time to admit women to the order.
Yes.
And then he relented only with reluctance.
Yes.
And with the specific rules. I think you've covered that, especially the rules in the last part of your talk.
Yes.
Another question was, what is the period of the composition of the Tripitaka?
The Tripitaka's compositions actually started from the first Buddhist council, that is from the time of Ajatashatru, which is about, say, close to about 1 BCE is what we could say. 1 BC. And again, Farooqji, the problem also that we have is from the 3rd century BC, that is from the Mauryan period, is when we have archaeological sources, we can actually start correlating. Otherwise, as I said, a lot of this was part of the Bhanaka tradition, the Sangha, and of course, the Sangha also getting divided. In fact, there were so many subsects of Buddhism. We know only of 3 subsects, which is the commonly we know of Vijnana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. But these subsects again divided itself into so many groups. Now, that's again. And by the way, these textual references that we get is also available in so many other parts of the world. So there is a lot of correlation that's happening in that space. Yes.
You mentioned other parts of the world, and that was a question which I had in mind.
Sure.
Was the role of women similar in Buddhism when Buddhism spread towards Southeast Asia?
100%. It was Ashoka who actually sent Sangamitra and Mahindra. So it was very much there. The Bhikkhuni Sangha was very active in the other parts of the world. In fact, it's very active even today. So yes, 100% yes. In fact, when you go to Bhutan, etc., you will see it. I mean, the Bhikkhuni Sangha is very active and they participate in a lot of, charitable works. Yes.
The next question is about food. The questioner says that they read that they stayed in a forest and didn't always get fruits and roots.
Yes.
So they hunted too. Is that correct?
Now, this hunting bit, I seriously, Farooqji, I don't know. Because in the various Vinaya rules that are there in the Bhikkhuni Sangha, there are specific foods that are forbidden and specific foods that they can eat. So they had to follow that particular diktat very, very clearly. So hunting in that space, I'm not sure. But then the fact of the case is, even things like that, they were so meticulous that things like even ghee and honey was kind of came under a lot of rules. Came under absolutely, rules and regulations were followed there.
Okay. Going back to the questions, we have a question from one of your students.
Oh,
his name is Ritvik.
Okay,
and he wants to ask you if you could give an example on the Buddhist opinion on universal suffrage and the universality of rights in polity.
100%. Thank you so much for that question, Ritvik. Such a lovely question. 100% yes. If you look at the Sangha and the way Sangha operated, it operated thoroughly in a democratic way. In fact, if you look at the Buddha based his Sangha on the Lichavi Gana, where people used to meet in the Santagraha, and by the show of hands is when that, the policy decisions were taken. So the concept of even the state, I mentioned about Ajnana Sutta, where, people give up their rights to one. Mahasammata, the translation of the word Mahasammata itself would mean universal acceptance. So universality as far as Buddha goes, in fact, I worked on a paper, which I would say Buddha was the earliest democrat in a systematic manner. He followed the process in a very systematic manner. 100% yes. And Metta, Karuna, Upekha, Maitri, the Brahma Viharas was again universal.
Veronica is asking whether you could recommend any books for her to read about this.
So what I could do, Farooqji, is maybe I could send you a mail of...
Sure.
And maybe I'll send you a mail of the books that could be readings, so that it's kind of formal and you could send it to all your participants.
Sure. Tim Hoffman says that, of course, he loved the presentation. And like you, he's also a scholar musician who was called the modern avatar of Panchasika by Dr. Lokesh Chandra. And he wants to ask you if you could touch upon the women who may have had major roles in music.
Now, I don't know about music in the Buddha's direct connect, but of course, we do have examples or analogies where Buddha's Dhamma is compared to a musical instrument. So who are the people who have had direct influence on Buddha, especially for this in the space of music? I won't have specific examples, but yes, it was very much part of the Gana Sanghas. We have various references to the Gana, especially since I spoke to you about this one particular sutta that comes to my mind is Brahmajala Sutta, where there are so many references that we get to the kind of musical instruments and the kind of lifestyle that they all led. And of course, in the archaeological evidences, especially if you're looking at the stupa architecture, etc., but the Toranas, you have references and you have depictions of various kind of musical instruments that existed, and definitely it was part of the society then.
So if we speak about music, dance can't be far behind.
100%.
Sunita's question is there any reference to dance by women in Buddhism, and what is the form of dance?
I don't know of any specific references to the kind of form of dance that it must have existed, because I would like to think that the Natya Shastra tradition must have been pretty much there, because when we see the kind of opulent lifestyle that Buddha led before he became Siddhartha, led before he became Buddha, we have references to the kind of the palaces that he lived. In fact, 3 palaces is where that he stayed. So dance, etc., was very much part. But what is the form of dance exactly? I'm not sure which is the style I could pinpoint. But of course, I would like to think that the Natya Shastra traditions, etc., must have definitely been there, because otherwise, how do you get the stories? How do you get the lifestyle and the richness of the society across?
So from music and dance, we move on to sculpture.
Sure.
Question by somebody called Swati KVPC is that, are there any sculptures of bhikkhunis in Buddhist caves that we can identify with any particular Theri bhikkhuni in the Therigatha?
The sculpture, we don't have specific paintings. In fact, most of the creations, now what I have put on my slide here are all stories of the Jatakas. And in fact, if I can just go back to that previous question that both the other participants asked me about music and dance. In fact, the various murals that are there as a part of the Jataka tradition, we get references to various kinds of instruments, etc., and maybe the kind of dance. So, for example, just to add, and then I'll come back to this particular question. Like, for example, if you can see the back of my screen, there is this very beautiful Avalokiteshwara Padmapani. If you can see this, okay?
Yeah.
So this Avalokiteshwara Padmapani, the reason why I said Natya Shastra is, if you see this is Khuddaka Nikaya, okay? So Avalokiteshwara. So Avalokita is he's looking down. In dance, we have Samam, Prachini, Milita, Ullokita, Avalokite. Avalokita is looking down. And Padmapani, Padma basically means hand, and he's holding a Khuddaka Nikaya. Even today, when we look at flowers, etc., in dance, we hold it like this. Right. So coming back to that point, music and dance and references to the kind of, like, for example, the way she's keeping her head or hastas, obviously the Natya Shastra tradition in some form must have definitely been there. Now, asking about this theories, most of the impressions that we get about Mahapajapati Gautami or Yashodhara, etc., are all artistic kind of imaginations, where specifically looking at a sculpture or a painting and saying that this is Yashodhara or this is Mahapajapati Gautami is not completely established. So for me to tell that, okay, there is this particular sculpture, I won't be quite sure about that.
And
but
finally, the last...
in the literature, we have references. Yes.
Finally, the last question from Jyoti Kerkar.
Sure.
She asks if it's true that finally Buddha was poisoned by a woman.
I would refrain from answering that, because Mahaparinirvana Sutta very clearly says that he took this pork, he was offered the pork meat, and that is what actually caused indigestion, and that led to the Mahaparinirvana, because they couldn't say no. See, the fact of the case is they were bhikkhus, and anything that is offered to them with love, they took it, and that is what led. So everything else, I would not add any credence to that.
Dr. Radha Kumar, that brings us to the end of a really fascinating session. Like I said earlier, it was really enlightening for me, who knew precious little about this. So thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. And for those who celebrate tomorrow, happy Easter. All the best. And
thank you so much.
And do join us for all our future talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you and happy Easter.
Thank you.
In Metta. Thank you.